Americans smash spending record on Black Friday. Hey, everybody, my name is JJ. You're watching Bull Boom Bear Bust, back with another dose of economic reality. How did this happen? How did Americans smash spending records when we've been hearing that Americans are maxed out or close to being maxed out and the savings rate near all time low? How did people do this? Well, it's not too hard to figure out. We're going to get into it all today and give you the data, the stats, the charts, everything behind it to show you how Americans were enabled, and I use that word enabled, to break holiday spending records. Now, so far, we've just seen, of course, Black Friday spending and Thanksgiving spending. I'm recording this on Saturday, November 25th. We're going to see Cyber Monday spending here in the next couple days. Will it smash records? Well, the answer is yes. And some people may say, why? How is that possible if Americans are tapped out? Well, they're not tapped out when it comes to credit, and that's what it's all about. It's about banks issuing credit and people using that credit to buy things. Pretty simple, right? And then debt increases, of course. And the big question is, how long can people sustain this debt before we see the big fallout? Well, let's go ahead and get into some articles here and some numbers right now. And let's take a look here at a recent headline. This is out of Newsweek. Americans smash Thanksgiving spending record. Let's first look at a chart here and see how much increase we had from previous years. We go down into this article here. We see this goes back to 2014. And what do we see here? We see another record. Well, basically, every year it's set records since 2014. Debt has increased every year. Therefore, spending increases every year. If people can only spend money that they had saved, you would see a crash, a mega crash in the economy, and you would see job losses and layoffs like you've never seen before. If people could only spend what they actually had saved. So, what keeps this whole thing going is the issuance of debt, aka credit, out of credit card companies. And credit cards, for the most part, credit card companies have not lowered the debt limits. In fact, they're still increasing the credit limits that are available to U.S. consumers, even with delinquencies rising. So it's much different than previous downturns. In 2007, 2008, remember, banks really cut back on the credit limits that people were allowed to have on their credit cards because of all the uncertainty that was out there at that time. Of course, QE1, 2, 3, and Infinity followed that, along with all the rescue programs for the banks, and the rest is history. We saw a run up of a economic bubble like we've never seen before. But now it's different, and yes, it is different for now. Doesn't mean that it can't change next week or next month. Maybe banks will get in big trouble and have to drop these credit limits. But for now, it's much different than what it was back in 2007, 2008, because the banks have not pulled back the credit lines or the credit limits as of yet. So now, along with headlines like the one we just saw about record Thanksgiving holiday spending, we also see headlines like this: Americans spend Thanksgiving with billions more debt than last year. And that's basically been the trend. It's increasing debt to infinity. Otherwise, the game has to come to an end because, again, if we had to go back to what people could spend, if they only can spend what they have saved, then this whole scheme comes crashing down. So you see why the banks are so important to this whole, what they call the economy and consumer spending. It's for that reason. And I took notice earlier. I was out at a few different places, a few different retail stores, including a plaza here, not too far from where I live. And the crowds didn't seem that thick. It seemed very sparse for the holiday shopping season. Well, a lot of people were buying stuff online. I did see probably eight, eight or nine Amazon trucks and FedEx and UPS trucks. And today's Saturday, and they're still working. So I just think a big portion or bulk of the U.S. consumer has shifted over to online shopping, and that makes it even easier. Think about it. If you don't have to even lift a finger, well, you might have to lift a finger to open up your computer or your device. But if you don't have to get behind the wheel and drive to the store, take out your credit card, everybody's just clicking online, it's even easier to spend money. So it's not only that the banks have enabled people by not dropping the credit limits, by allowing endless debt or seemingly endless debt. I think there's a limit, but right now it's seems like seemingly endless debt. Americans can just do this right from their device right now, making it even easier. But we also see headlines like this. Let's take a look here. This is out of the Wall Street Journal. American borrowers are getting closer to maxing out. Credit card utilization and delinquency rates are on the rise. So this game does have an ending. We just have to figure out when and how fierce is the ending going to be. So the question would be then, at what point do the banks pull back on the credit limits? Do they, instead of increasing the credit limits like we've been seeing for many, many years, when will they drop credit limits? When will enough panic enter the banking sector to force or to scare banks and credit card companies into dropping the limit on these credit cards? When you find the answer to that question, that's when you'll know when the real economic downturn is going to happen. The credit card delinquency rate is close to 5% according to the data here, and it increased actually from 3% earlier this year. So that's a pretty big increase for seeing this just less than a year. Is this enough to throw the credit card companies into panic? No, because I think they know that they're always going to have a rescue program at the end of the day. And one thing also to keep in mind, if you want to see the cost of living come down, then you also should want to see the credit limits come down on their credit cards. Remember, the more money people have to spend that they don't actually have, they have credit available to spend, but the more credit they have to buy things with, the higher prices are going to go, right? Because retailers, they're not going to drop the price when people are taking things off of the shelves very quickly, or when they're buying their services very quickly. Of course not. They're only going to drop the price when the demand is lessened and therefore things aren't selling. So then they're forced to drop their prices. But right now, for the most part, they're not doing that. Yes, there's some things where prices are coming down, but for the most part, this inflation is still going up from the previous year. All right, but let's get into some other news here. I wanted to talk about this. And if you remember, we talked about this in October. Student loan debtors, people with student loan debt, had to resume making their payments. Well, here we are, less than 2 months later. We're almost to the end of November, and we see a surge in bankruptcies amongst student loan borrowers here. Let's take a look at this article here. This is out of Go Banking Rates. Student loan borrowers are filing bankruptcy to avoid payments. Another headline here, CNBC, more student loan borrowers are walking away from their debt in bankruptcy. According to the current administration, more people with student loans have been able to walk away from their debt in bankruptcy due to a Biden administration policy change last November. So it used to be very difficult, almost impossible, to discharge student loan debt in bankruptcy. They've made it easier for some people. They have to demonstrate, I believe, certain financial hardships or needs. But of course, we're going to see a spike in bankruptcies now. If you can discharge your student loan debt, there's going to be a new motive there, a new incentive to go ahead and file bankruptcy. So of course, we're going to see a big spike in bankruptcy. This is going to be people's keys to exit to get out of this debt. So it's really it's a no-brainer that this is going to happen. In the first 10 months of the new policy, student loan borrowers filed more than 630 bankruptcy cases, a significant, if I can say that word, a significant increase from previous years, according to the government. Continues here. In the fall of 2022, the U.S. Department of Education updated bankruptcy guidelines to make it easier for struggling borrowers to get their student loans erased. Previously, it was difficult, if not impossible, just what I just said, for people to part with their educational debt in a normal bankruptcy proceeding. Quote, I am thrilled that our one-year review indicates that our efforts have made a real difference in borrowers, said Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta in a recent statement, unquote. And listen to some of these numbers here. The vast majority of borrowers seeking discharge have received full or partial discharges. Outstanding student loan debt in the U.S. is $1.7 trillion. Around 7% of student loan borrowers have a balance of more than $100,000. 7%. Wow. Even before the health crisis, some 10 million borrowers were in delinquency or default. 10 million borrowers in delinquency or default. So, of course, you see they have to change things around to keep this whole economy from imploding. Imagine how much less spending there would be if people couldn't discharge this debt in bankruptcy, right? So they have to do these things to keep the illusion alive, to keep the economy looking like it's going good. And I guess you could say the economy is going good, because if the economy is based on debt and spending, and if banks are still allowing people to go further into debt, then of course the economy is going to look good in the meantime. Is it a real sign of consumer strength, though, that they can take on debt? No, to me, it seems like a very sign of weakness for the U.S. consumer. If people, again, were spending money that they had, that would be a sign of strength. But instead, it's a sign of weakness when they have to borrow it. Now, the interesting thing is not only is the debt increasing for people, the rate of increase is breaking records every quarter. According to the Fed, the latest quarterly survey of household debt and credit card debt in America has increased by $45 billion from the first quarter of 2023. That represents a 4.6% increase in a single quarter, with cardholders shouldering 13-figure debt at $1.07 trillion for the first time. In short, that amounts to an average balance of about $5,733 per cardholder. Eye-watering to say the least, and the fact that many of us carry no balances makes this statistical average even more alarming. Yeah, you have to factor in the people that don't have any debt, and it's still 5,733 per card holder. With the average interest rate around 21% right now, making the minimum payment on a $5,733 balance would result in over $1,000 in interest payments per year. Even if you have the average balance, if you make the minimum, you're paying $1,000 just in interest every year. That's not to mention some borderline predatory credit cards that impose a 30% APR. That's if you're late or if you go over your limit and things like that. All right, folks, so there you have it. That is how Americans were able to have another record holiday spending Thanksgiving weekend in this case. And today's only Saturday as I'm recording this. We'll see what happens with Cyber Monday. Then, of course, we'll see what happens leading up to Christmas. I don't think the banks are going to be pulling back on the credit that they're issuing, even though delinquencies are rising. Right? That's how the game's going to be kept going. Hope you're well. Hope you enjoyed this report. Please give us a like and subscribe. Help give us a little bit of traction here. Help keep us alive. That would be awesome. And we'll talk to everybody very soon. Hope you're having a great Thanksgiving weekend, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye now.